There is a difference between producing something and creating something, and modern culture has almost forgotten it. We are taught to hustle, to optimize, to ship, to build a personal brand, to turn every hour into a measurable output. What we rarely ask, underneath all the activity, is the simpler and older question. What am I actually giving? Viktor Frankl called this question the doorway to creative values, the first of his 3 paths to meaning. Creating, in his sense, is not primarily about success. It is not about recognition, money, or scale. It is about what your work offers, what it leaves behind, what it adds to the world that was not there before. When you look at your work through this lens, a lot of what passes for productive activity turns out to be empty motion, and a lot of what looks ordinary turns out to be genuine creation. Frankl made the definition deliberately wide. A novelist writing a book is exercising creative values. So is a carpenter building a table, a parent raising a child, a nurse caring for a patient, a gardener tending a small plot, a teacher preparing a lesson no one will remember in 10 years but that changes a single student forever. The scale does not matter. The offering does. This is the first clue that Frankl was not a romantic about work. He was not saying you need to find your calling and become famous at it. He was saying something much humbler and much harder. Whatever your work is, you can approach it in a way that makes it a gift, or in a way that makes it a transaction. The difference is entirely inside you, and it shows up in the quality of what you produce. Work as transaction is driven by what you hope to get from it. Wages, approval, status, escape. When the rewards are good, you do the work. When they stop, you stop. The work itself is a means to something else. Work as gift is different. You still want the wages and the recognition. Frankl was not naive about that. But underneath those desires there is something else, a sense that this particular task, no matter how small, is asking you to do it well because doing it well matters. A meal prepared with attention, a letter written with care, a small repair finished correctly. These acts create meaning because something in them points beyond the immediate payoff. This is also why the creative path is strongest when the task is specific. Abstract ambition rarely generates meaning. The student who dreams of writing a great novel but cannot write a paragraph is suffering from a false version of the creative path. The meaning is not in the imagined book. It is in the actual page, written today, imperfect, offered anyway. Frankl saw this pattern clearly in his clinical work. Patients who were paralyzed by grand visions of what they should be accomplishing were often cured the moment they identified one concrete thing that their present circumstances were asking of them. The grand vision recedes. The real work begins. There is another feature of creative values that modern culture tends to hide. The most meaningful work is often invisible. The parent who sits with a sick child through the night, the nurse who stays an extra hour with a dying patient, the friend who listens without giving advice, the worker who does a difficult job well without anyone noticing. Frankl refused to equate meaning with visibility. In fact, he suspected that visibility often corrupts meaning. The person who is constantly checking whether their contribution is being seen has already shifted the center of gravity of the work away from the work itself. This does not mean recognition is bad. It means recognition is not the measure. The measure is whether the offering was real. Finally, there is a hard truth about creative values, and Frankl did not soften it. The creative path has a limit. There comes a point, for most human beings, when the capacity to create is taken away. Illness does this. Aging does this. Sudden loss of circumstance does this. Retirement, unemployment, disability, the simple fact of running out of strength. If your meaning has rested entirely on the creative path, the closing of that door can feel like the ending of the reason to live. This is why Frankl refused to treat creative values as the whole story. They are one path, and they work beautifully for a long stretch of a human life. But they are not the final path, and anyone who stakes everything on them will eventually meet the limit. The task is to pour yourself fully into creative work while it is available, and at the same time to know that the other 2 paths are quietly waiting, ready to open when this one begins to close. That knowledge frees you, in the present, to create without desperation. You do not need this work to be everything. It only needs to be real. Subscribe to The Psychology of Viktor Frankl to explore more of his timeless ideas.